Fifth edition introduces the concept of an advantage and disadvantage in combat, which affects the way you roll dice. Instead of rolling one die, you roll two. How does that really affect the combat? That's what I'm going to discuss in this video. So what does this advantage and disadvantage mean in Dungeons and Dragons? I'm going to try and not get too technical, and we'll discuss what it really means when you're in combat. So my first step was to just create a little chart, and I did this in Excel because it's easy to do that. So what happens if you roll a 1 through 20, 20-sided die, and I just numbered them down. Then I numbered the armor classes across the top. 1 through 20. So then I did, I'm only going to use a simple little calculation. Is this roll greater than or equal to this armor class? If so, it's a hit. If not, it's a miss. Real simple chart. Hopefully everybody doesn't have any problem with that. So what happens if I roll a 4 and I'm going against armor class 5, I'm going to miss. If I'm going against armor class 4, I'm going to hit. And it comes out here to all the armor classes. Not a problem. Simple little chart. Then I added a couple more columns. And this column counts up how many times did it hit. And this counts up how many times it missed. And this just replicates the roll column. So what I do is you basically take the number of hits and divide it by the total, which is 20. So if it's I roll a 1, I only get a 5% chance of hitting the armor class. Independent, that depends upon the armor class. I'm only going to hit armor class 1. So, or put it the other way, I've got a 95% chance I'm going to miss. So this was my first try at looking at some of this stuff, and I created a couple of little charts that maybe you can see there. What are my probability of hitting and missing? Sort of makes sense. Now, 5th edition talks about rolling 2 dice for advantage and disadvantage. So let's just talk about rolling. Let's just roll. Assume we rolled 2 dice even for normal. So normally you don't have advantage, you don't have a disadvantage, but what does it mean? So let's say I roll a 1 and roll 2. So I just enumerated all the possibilities. If I roll a 1 on the first die, I can roll a 1 on the second die or up through there. So that gives 400 possible combinations, right? So we'll get into that when we get into disadvantage. But let's just assume the effective roll, we're just going to take a look at the first die. So in essence, you roll 2 dice and you ignore one of them all the time, or it rolls off the table, you don't ignore it, but you rolled 2 dice. So this does the same thing. It calculates hits or misses, but this time, instead of adding up across to the right, let's add up going down, because there are a lot more possibilities. Like if I roll an 8 and a 1, it's a hit, but and so on. So we get down to the bottom here. So as I'd said before, there's 400. This is the count. It's always 400. The number of hits we have, for armor class 1, you always hit. So it's a 100% chance of hitting armor class 1 on a D roll. This is ignoring all the modifiers. So what happens is the same, and it drops down across. So this is the chart. I mean, this is the table showing this. Hopefully fairly simple, easy to understand. Then I went into Excel and I said, let's plot this. So here's my probability and here's my armor class. So it gives me a nice straight line, sort of what we'd expect. Now what happens when we do disadvantage? So now this one here, again, it's 2 dice, same thing. But this one, I always take the minimum between the 2 dice. And in Excel, that's easy. That just uses the minimum function between the 2. So you can see it's the minimum of the 2 dice. And so what happens if I roll a 1 and a 1 and a 6, it's a 1. So I just do the same thing with the hits and misses, calculating across, and I come on down through the same thing here to the bottom, and we calculate these numbers here. They're a little bit different. So if I plot that out just like I did before, I get a different curve. It's not a straight curve. And in a similar fashion, I do the same thing with advantage, where this is the maximum. And we can take a look at, the numbers come on down to here and so on. And then we calculate, this is the advantage curve. So let's plot all three of them together. This is all three. The blue is normal, this is disadvantage, and this is advantage. Now, several other websites and blogs have talked about that, but let's look at it a slightly different way. So I'm just copying the numbers across. These are linked across, so I put them down here into this chart here, so we have armor class, advantage, and disadvantage. Now, the interesting thing about Dungeons & Dragons, because we use a D20, each side of a D20 is your probability of rolling that side is 5%. There's 100% probability divided by 20 is 5. So you got 5% per side. So if you take the difference between the normal roll and the disadvantage roll, that's what it's called delta. It's the difference. So this is the difference, and this is the difference in here. So what happens is that now, because that's just basic, but we can take a look. This is where it gets a little bit more complicated. That's the chance to hit. I really want the chance. I really want to calculate the delta. So in essence, I subtract it from 1, and then I multiply it by 20, and then add 1. But this is how you convert it to a die roll. If you want, I could explain that in more detail. But that's just a little bit of math magic. Anyway, so what happens is that this, if I modify these to here, so what happens is that we can take a look at these here. Notice that there's so this one here takes the normal and subtracts the disadvantage. That's why we get 0. So what are the differences in the odds? And then we just round it so it's 1 digit. So we get 0, 1, -1, -2, -3. This is the equivalent of a normal modifier. So what does it actually mean? If we take a look at this, if we plot this way, this gives us the chart of how it affects it. If the creature you're trying to hit has armor class 10, if you have advantage, that's basically equivalent to adding +5 to your die. If it's disadvantage, that's equivalent to subtracting 5 from your die. So this tells us a lot about the way advantage and disadvantage works. It has a larger effect in the middle range and a less effect as you get out there. Basically, if it's a high armor class 20, it's only a plus or minus 1. Now, I'm really not sure that that's what they intended, but that's what we get with 5th edition. Makes me question some of the things about advantage. It's simple to do, it's easy to roll, it doesn't affect the speed much, but it affects the middle armor classes more than it does the high or the low armor classes. So if we get back to this delta here, we see that if it's an armor class 12, we either add or subtract 5, depending upon if it's advantage or disadvantage. If it's armor class 18, we either add or subtract 3. So that gives you a comparison of 5th edition advantage and disadvantage against other editions. 5th edition uses in theory, a more complicated process, using the mathematic probability, but it really has some odd effects because it'll affect middle armor classes much more than it affects high or low level armor classes. Because if you're armor class 19, you know, it's less than 2 plus or minus 2. So that is kind of unusual. It's not what I was expecting, but I thought you might be interested in this. So hope you enjoy this one. This was interesting to put together and calculate how the advantage and disadvantage actually works. Thank you. Now for a confession. When I went and got a degree in business, I remember walking into the statistics class, and the professor asked all these business majors, what is your, do you have any concerns about taking this class? And almost everybody in the class said, oh, I'm really worried about the math. And I made the comment, I'm actually looking forward to the math because my original background was math and physics. And the professor actually sort of slammed me for saying, oh, but these people have math anxiety. And I go, I don't care about math anxiety. I enjoy math. That's something I enjoy. So I bypassed some of the math in this and went through and tried to make it simple and easy to understand. Hope you enjoyed it. If you like it, give me a thumbs up and maybe subscribe to my channel.